Good morning. As new supervisors and managers, I wanted to talk to you today about a very important topic, and that is dysfunctional and toxic leadership. By letting you know about this type of leadership now, it'll prepare you to not only recognize and address this type of leadership and leaders and employees, but it will make you aware of your own behaviors that may lead you to your own dysfunction and toxicity so that you can avoid these pitfalls and assist in leading the organization in a positive direction towards success. Of course, the first thing you need to know is, what does it mean by dysfunctional and toxic leadership? What does it mean to be dysfunctional leader and a toxic leader? Because there's a fine line where one can lead to the other. Next, you'll learn the basics of how to become aware of not only what makes a dysfunctional leader versus a toxic leader, but how you can become aware of your own behaviors that may lead you down this road. Probably one of the most important things you'll learn is the reason why we're so concerned about this type of leadership in our organization and the negative repercussions that can result from not only allowing this type of behavior to occur, what can happen if this behavior is not addressed. This leads to our ways to identify those toxic leaders in the organization and ways that you can be a part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And finally, I will offer you tips on how you can notice these types of behaviors in yourself and the steps that you can take to change. So, what exactly is a dysfunctional leader? And what are the overall characteristics of one? Dysfunctional leaders, plain and simple, tend to make bad decisions. But what is even worse than that, these leaders may not make any decisions at all. Either way, dysfunctional leaders have a negative impact on the organization and on his or her followers, either through their detachment from not knowing their followers' needs and being disengaged with them, or making decisions without keeping their followers or the organization in mind through either the big picture and the small picture. Toxic leaders, on the other hand, make decisions, but make those decisions for their own benefit with little concern for others. These decisions are acting in malevolent ways towards followers and other leaders, especially if the follower does not conform to the leader's way of thinking or attempts to challenge the leader. Therefore, this forces the followers to either remain silent and conform to the leader's toxic behaviors, or to act on behalf of the leader in the hope of gaining favor with them, colluding with them. At times, this type of leader will also have employees create an environment for infighting because it will allow the leader to have more control over both groups of people. However, there is one key difference that separates the dysfunctional leader from the truly toxic leader. So, what separates the dysfunctional leader from the toxic leader? One word that you need to remember is the word intent. A dysfunctional leader may display certain behaviors or make certain decisions which are harmful, but do so without intent or malevolence, but do so more out of inability, confusion, or disengagement. A toxic leader, on the other hand, acts and behaves with intent. The toxic leader knows what they are doing, knows what they are doing can be harmful and cause negative repercussions, but do so with a clear and precise motive. Dysfunctional leaders may be incompetent, indecisive, unaware of themselves or those around them, be in a situation which is not a good fit, or in which they cannot relate their actions with the consequences. Toxic leaders, on the other hand, are malevolent and cause harm to others to fulfill their own desires and do so with purpose, have an awareness of their decisions and actions, but do not care and will always be toxic to others if there is no one to intervene. So these are the underlying personalities of dysfunctional and toxic leaders. But there are things that are oftentimes present in leaders who are dysfunctional or toxic that we need to look for. When looking at dysfunctional and toxic leadership, there are commonalities. Oftentimes, dysfunctional leaders are poor communicators, meaning they cannot or will not be able to disseminate information effectively to followers. Whether that is out of fear of saying the wrong thing or fear of ridicule, it is a common element. Additionally, dysfunctional leaders take a very long time to make decisions, or after toiling over options, simply cannot decide on the path to follow, so they do nothing. If the dysfunctional leader makes a decision, so much time has passed and they have overanalyzed the situation so much that the decision made is a poor one, either out of delay or out of inability. These leaders also avoid interactions that will cause them to have a confrontation with others, and therefore they may be more apt to give in to others rather than have conflict. Unfortunately, this conflict avoidance can not only lead to holding others non accountable for their action, but it can also lead to toxicity within the employees of the work group. And finally, out of fear of failure, dysfunctional leaders want to have their hands in everything that is going on because they do not want to be blamed for anything going wrong. Toxic leaders, on the other hand, communicate exactly what they want from others, want their orders to be carried out in a precise manner, and will quickly and unwaveringly effect punishment on those who do not obey. These decisions are not good for the organization, but for the good of the one person, the toxic leader. This top-down, overly militaristic leader leads through fear, forcing others to be quiet and conform, or in another possible survival method, employees become closer to the leader by ensuring their agendas are executed. And finally, toxic leaders have little time for rules and regulations and will go out of their way to circumvent those ways of maintaining good order if it will benefit them. Both dysfunctional and toxic leaders are a cause for concern in an organization because of the negative repercussions that can come from unabated negative behaviors, decisions, and actions. So here is a simple cyclical cause and effect depiction of organizational concerns and impacts and why toxic and dysfunctional leadership needs to be addressed. First, toxic behavior can be exhibited by a leader. If those behaviors are not identified and dealt with, then there is no accountability of the person exhibiting that behavior. A lack of accountability can be traced to a superior who may be displaying dysfunctional behaviors, but not necessarily toxic behaviors. However, by not holding that toxic leader accountable, the behavior is allowed to continue. As the toxic leader continues displaying that behavior, employees become more and more dissatisfied, either working in fear or working with the toxic leader. Those who conform out of fear are already looking for other positions, either inside or outside the organization. As employees become more and more under pressure, they eventually leave the organization, leaving a gap in personnel, causing additional workload for those left behind. Unable to cope, more and more people leave the organization and it begins to decline under the weight of that toxic leader. If one area fails, it can then lead to other areas of the organization failing, ultimately ending in organizational failure, lost jobs, lost funds, and accountability being levied against the dysfunctional leader who could have taken care of the problem from the outset. As you can see, the need to deal with dysfunctional and toxic leaders is paramount to successful organizations. And you need to know how to strive to keep this type of behavior and those type of leaders out of the workplace. So, how to identify and address toxic leaders and employees? Honestly, looking at yourself and others is the first step in avoiding this type of behavior. Through day-to-day interaction and observation of others, you can now identify behaviors that make you think that maybe there is something there needs to be addressed. If you believe a person is displaying this type of style, don't ignore it. Sometimes you just have to say the baby's ugly. Another way to determine if your feelings and observations are correct is to keep your finger on the pulse of those around you in the organization. Get out from behind your desk and talk to people. Oftentimes, when you hold hallway conversations and have an open door policy that is welcoming, employees will come to you and let you know what is truly going on in the workplace. If you believe a person is toxic or dysfunctional, seek out advice of trusted agents, either within or outside the organization. Ask what you can do to intervene or what you can do to make others aware of the situation so they can intervene. Don't ignore the situation, address it. Nothing will ever change unless the right people are held accountable for their actions. So, dysfunctional and toxic leadership intervention. So, what do? There's some simple steps, and granted, they don't always work, but you can be aware of them and try to use them. First, create awareness through information. Data doesn't always lie. Second, transform awareness into understanding. Help your leader understand why their behavior is having negative effects on the company. Next, determine where you are now. Set a baseline. By having that baseline of data, you can create and implement leadership goals to achieve, and you can find ways to help your leader change their behavior if they're acceptable to it. And finally, check yourself, check them, and make adjustments. Sometimes things will need to be sustained, but sometimes you have to have a whole different strategic plan. So today, what did we learn? We have the definitions of the type of leadership. We've shown the difference between the two types of leadership, how to become aware, how to intervene, the negative effects that this type of leadership can have on an organization, and how to keep yourself and others from becoming a toxic leader. I know this may have been a lot to take in today. Therefore, these slides will also be available on our organization SharePoint. and I am always available to assist you. Does anyone have any comments, questions, or concerns? Thank you.